The Leviathan. Is it a dragon? Welcome back to the Alef Tav Calendar preliminary research project. In order to track the passage of time, ancient cultures needed to memorize the apparent shapes and movements observed in the heavens. Our current research explores whether the creatures and surrounding details listed in the Book of Job are not just descriptions of earthly animals, but could also represent apparent shapes visible in the Milky Way. Please note that this research is preliminary and somewhat subjective, so it should be viewed with that in mind. This final beast mentioned in Job 41 receives the longest description. The creature's name is Leviathan, or in Hebrew, Leviathan. Having attended post-secondary school to study biblical Hebrew, I found it intriguing that both the behemoth and the Leviathan were left untranslated, with English transliterations mimicking the Hebrew pronunciations. While some translations identify Leviathan with a crocodile, several of the Leviathan's features do not align well with a crocodile. This Leviathan creature is mentioned in 4 other passages. Near the start of Job, we read, "May the cursors of the day mark it, those who are ready to arouse Leviathan." Psalm 74 appears to be describing the parting of the sea during the Exodus. It equates the corpses of the Egyptian army with lifeless heads of a Leviathan. It reads, "You divided the sea by your strength. You broke the heads of the sea serpents and the waters. You crushed the heads of Leviathan in pieces and gave him as food to the people inhabiting the wilderness." Psalm 104 alludes to the Leviathan being a sea creature. It reads, "This great and wide sea, in which are innumerable teeming things, living things both small and great. There are the ships that sail about. There is that Leviathan which you have made play there." Isaiah 27 adds even more details. "In that day, Yahweh will punish Leviathan, the fleeing serpent, with his fierce and great and mighty sword, even Leviathan, the twisted serpent, and he will kill the dragon or sea serpent who lives in the sea." This verse describes Leviathan twice as a serpent, or nachash, both fleeing and twisted. It also describes it as a sea serpent, Tanin, who lives in the sea. The Brown Driver Briggs lexicon entry lists serpent, dragon, and Leviathan. The word serpent comes from a Latin term meaning creeping. Dragon is derived from the Greek word drakon. The Greek drakon was more associated with poisonous spit or breath than with a modern Western dragon, though fiery breath is still attested in a few myths. It seems logical that the fire of a drakon was an ancient way of describing the burning sensation of a snake bite, likening it to the feeling of being burned by fire. Not only that, both reptile poison and skin infections from bites will manifest itself on the skin in a similar manner to a burn. If ancient cultures saw a serpent-like shape in the Milky Way, then it is easy to see how this description could evolve into the modern myth of a flying dragon as it was passed down through the generations. However, we are not investigating the Greek drakon, but rather the creature described in Job. The Hebrew word Leviathan, or Leviathan, comes from a root meaning to turn, to twist, or to wind. The lexicon suggests a crocodile as the closest match for the last creature described in Job. The crocodile known to those in the Fertile Crescent would most likely have been the Nile crocodile. The Strong's Concordance offers a similar definition, describing it as a sea monster or dragon, a large aquatic animal. Once again, Strong's Concordance attempts to link this creature to a dinosaur, specifically a plesiosaurus. Finding nebulae shapes that match the description of Leviathan in Job is no easy task. We will go through several attempts to locate shapes that might fit. As always, you must use your own discretion in determining whether the author intended to describe a nebula shape or not. Even if the narrative did not describe a specific shape, I am confident that cultures throughout history have tried to describe these shapes, and their descriptions have been passed down through time. First, there appears to be what looks like a serpent's head here, with a dark, twisting body. Second, a series of dark dust clouds vaguely resemble the rings on a twisted serpent's body. The serpent's head seems to be here, with its mouth open, and two bright stars near this heel-like nebula acting as fangs. Third, a large, dark, twisted region obscures the visible light across a significant portion of the Milky Way. I've debated which end is the head and which is the tail. As this region is more noteworthy, it may have been the origin or reference for the Greeks' Draco for the northern constellation. Fourth, a smaller area here resembles a coiled serpent. And fifth, among these options, I chose this last region for comparison to the Job narrative, as the head shows similarities to a very large crocodile. This puzzle is complex, filled with uncertainties, a puzzle left hidden, even lost, in the star sands of time. Verse 1 reads, "Can you draw out the Leviathan with a hook, or with a cord press down his tongue? Can you put a reed through his nose, or with a hook pierce his jaw?" The hooks, cord, and reed may allude to these smaller dark dust cloud nebulae near his tongue, nose, and jaw. A series of questions follows in the narrative, all with an implied answer of no. There are 3 "will he" statements and 3 "will you" statements. It reads, "Will he make many supplications to you? Will he speak softly to you? Will he make a covenant with you? Will you take him as a servant forever? Will you play with him as with a bird? Or will you leash him for your maidens? Will your companions make a banquet of him? Will they apportion him among merchants? Can you fill his skin with harpoons, or his head with fishing spears?" Here is an apparent shape of a servant on hands and knees, making supplication. We have already noted that the Leviathan's head resembles a bird with outstretched wings. In previous videos, we discussed other apparent bird shapes. There are also maiden shapes here and here. The banquet may be represented by this table-like shape. The merchants may be represented by the balance scale shapes. The harpoons and fishing spears may correspond to these long, straight, dark nebulae. The narrative continues. Lay your hand on him, remember the battle, never do it again. Indeed, any hope of overcoming him is false. Shall one not be overwhelmed at the sight of him? No one is so fierce that he would dare stir him up. The Hebrew word for hand here is kaf. In previous videos, we explored how the letters of the Paleo Hebrew alphabet correspond to apparent shapes in the Milky Way as a time-tracking device. The sequential letters Yod and Kaf can be found in these regions. The letter meanings draw our attention to matching nebulae shapes. The focus then shifts from Leviathan to God himself. Who then is able to stand against me? Who has preceded me that I should pay him? Everything under the heaven is mine. The narrative then discusses individual parts that make up the Leviathan: limbs, coat, face, teeth, scales, eyes, mouth, nostrils, breath, neck, flesh, and heart. It reads, I will not conceal his limbs, his mighty power, or his graceful proportions. Who can remove his outer coat? Who can approach him with a double bridle? Who can open the doors of his face? With his terrible teeth all around. The face is not opened, but rather closed, of which the narrative asks, who can open? His rows of scales are his pride, shut up tightly as with a seal. One is so near another that no air can come between them. They are joined one to another. They stick together and cannot be parted. These verses are used to describe his scales. A Nile crocodile indeed has a majestic set of scales. Yet the apparent nebula shape does not seem to match crocodile-like scales. I ask myself, how could this description fit both a crocodile and a nebulae shape? The word scales in verse 15 contains two Hebrew words, afike, maganim, with the sense of channels or torrents, ravines and shields. Therefore, a series of shields with ravines between them is translated into English as rows of scales. This may describe the contrasting light patches with dark lines between them in the nebulae. These puzzles do not get any easier as we continue reading. His sneezes flash forth light, and his eyes are like the eyelids of the morning. Out of his mouth go burning lights, sparks of fire shoot out, smoke goes out of his nostrils, as from a boiling pot and burning rushes. His breath kindles coals, and a flame goes out of his mouth. The text compares the features of a Leviathan's head to burning fire and smoke. The eyes, like the eyelids of the morning, may refer to the dawn before the sun rises, when the sunlight reflects off the underside of clouds. This could resemble the way a crocodile's eyes shine. Crocodile eyes contain a reflective layer of tissue called the tapetum lucidum, which enhances night vision and causes their eyes to glow when exposed to light. Essentially, light is reflected back through the photoreceptors to improve night vision. This nebula region here has a similar vertical split pupil, like that of a crocodile. Regarding the description of sneezings flashing forth light, I've watched videos of crocodiles sneezing. While they produce a small spray, it is nothing like what is described in Job's narrative. There's no flashing or burning light, no sparks of fire, smoke, or flame. Yet, when we observe this region in front of the Leviathan's mouth, the nebula shapes around the head give a fair representation of what the narrative is expressing. His sneezings flash forth light, and his eyes are like the eyelids of the morning. Out of his mouth go burning lights, sparks of fire shoot out. Smoke goes out of his nostrils, as from a boiling pot and burning rushes. His breath kindles coals, and a flame goes out of his mouth. The dark coal-like nebula is in front of the mouth, being kindled, as it were, by the bright flashes of light and flame. As mentioned before, the bites of some venomous reptiles leave a burning sensation and can cause blistering similar to third-degree burns. However, a crocodile, as the lexicon suggests the Leviathan to be, is not a fire-breathing or venomous reptile. But a crocodile's bite can lead to serious infections, which resemble third-degree burns. It is possible that past cultures related the effects of poisonous reptile bites and infections to severe burns. Comparing this narrative to both nebula shapes and reptiles is indeed a challenging puzzle that requires much discretion. The narrative continues. Strength dwells in his neck, and sorrow dances or leaps before him. The folds of his flesh are joined together. They are firm on him and cannot be moved. These two verses better describe a crocodile than the apparent nebula shapes, yet we can identify the neck region and the folds of the flesh. His heart is as hard as stone, even as hard as a lower millstone. The phrase hard heart is often used in various scriptures as a metaphor for stubbornness. The lower millstone is usually more fixed and heavier than the upper millstone, staying put during the grinding of grain. Here are some guesses as to what nebula shapes might represent the heart region, which could also resemble a lower millstone. This last guess not only has a lower millstone, but also an upper millstone and a red nebula that resembles a heart. When he raises himself up, the mighty are afraid. Because of his crashings, they are beside themselves. Though the sword reaches him, it cannot avail, nor does spear, dart, or javelin. He regards iron as straw and bronze as rotten wood. The arrow cannot make him flee. Sling stones become like stubble to him. Darts are regarded as straw, and he laughs at the threat of javelins. We now have a series of weapons and metals: swords, spears, darts, and javelins, iron and bronze. As these weapons are more simple than a living creature, it would not be productive to mark all the possible weapon shapes, as there are too many. However, we will mark out two that we observed in previous videos, wielded by riders, the sword and the bow. His undersides are like sharp potsherds. He spreads pointed marks in the mire. This verse is difficult to match with the lexicon suggestion that the Leviathan is a crocodile. Although the Nile crocodile has a jagged back, its belly is smooth and not sharp. Here are some nebula regions that resemble potsherds. And marks in the mire. He makes the deep boil like a pot. He makes the sea like a pot of ointment. He leaves a shining wake behind him. One would think that the deep had white hair. On earth there is nothing like him, which is made without fear. He beholds every strong thing. He is king over all the children of pride. There are numerous videos on YouTube showing various animals overcoming crocodiles, lions, tigers, jaguars, hippopotamus, elephants, and anacondas. In terms of nebula shapes, if this large form represents Leviathan, the narrative correctly concludes that this creature is larger than all preceding it. This exercise of using the creatures in Job's narrative to memorize and identify various regions in the Milky Way is just a small piece of a much larger puzzle in an ancient chronology. While I still harbor some doubts about this exercise, I was genuinely surprised by the accuracy with which we could not only identify the creatures, but also many of the smaller details surrounding each one. In this preliminary calendar research project, we uncover clues, as well as leave clues and hidden riddles. As we discovered in previous videos, the narrative of Noah's time contains a hidden calendar describing the movements of the sun, moon, and planets against the backdrop of stars, including the dense band of blue and red nebulae that has been given the names Galaxy or Milky Way. The flood narrative calendar is describing a flood-like band of stars arching overhead. Gradually, over the course of the narrative, the floods recede. The blue band settles back down to the horizon, and the colorful sections, containing the apparent shapes of living creatures, becomes visible again. There are many more hidden details that remain to be decrypted and rediscovered. We use the narrative of Job to pick out creatures, cattle, creeping things, and birds that all sink below the horizon. However, we've purposely left out another key detail. That is, all mankind. Genesis 7 reads, "All flesh that moved on the earth perished, birds and cattle and beasts, and every swarming thing that swarms upon the earth, and all mankind." In Hebrew, v'kol ha'adam, literally all the Adam. Then it repeats in verse 23, "Thus he blotted out every living thing that was upon the face of the land," or in Hebrew, Adamah, from man, or Adam, to cattle, to creeping things, to birds of the heaven, and they were blotted out from the earth. In the next video, we will work backwards from the flood date, deciphering the details of the genealogy of Adam, and how they were blotted out. We will see how this calendar system is intertwined with the descendants of Adam, the meanings of their names, and their legendary long lifespans.